I thought now might be a good time to go over the current state of the Weed Warrior. I've done bits and pieces to it here and there and all over the place, but just bits and pieces while I await parts and other things. As you can see by the two rails sticking out from underneath the front of the chassis there, one of the first things I did was reinforce the chassis with 1-inch steel tube. It's going to be a little difficult to see, but I'll try and get underneath for a shot. Yeah, you can see the 1-inch steel tube there. It has rails spanning the length as well as some cross members. The diamond tread that you can see there is the transmission support plate. Back here I took off the original drawbar plate, cut the drawbar off, flipped the plate and stuck it back in. So now there's a flange underneath for strength as opposed to the original flange on top which bolted on. It's been welded in place. You can pretty much ignore that axle cutout. The rules that I'm building to don't allow you to cut the axle into the chassis, so that's a no-no. The 2x4s under the fender pan are only temporary while I mock up height. The fender pan came from an entirely different tractor and it's going to work out better for what I want it to do. So I've got the height mocked up with 2x4s, and I can't really finalize that until I get my tires and get the axle hung so that I can check my clearances. The seat is a fiberglass bucket from a racing car. It's been cut down to cart seat height because I was advised to do so by the governing body. Here you can get a better look at where the transmission is going to sit. This plate here is actually set down below the 1-inch tubing that I've got the frame reinforced with. So the tranny is actually going to sit down inside the chassis by 1 inch. I did the same thing with the engine mount. We'll get to that in a second. Yes, the engine. Let's just flip this hood up. There we go. Okay, engine. 18 horsepower Briggs & Stratton opposed twin. It's a lovely thing. Okay, so again with the 1-inch tube, I've got the whole dashboard assembly completely structurally reinforced. 1-inch members here, a hoop here, and a cross member for the steering column support. The steering column passes through the dashboard on a, let me stop and think about this, thank you, 5/8 flange bearing. So you've got the steering wheel, steering column passes through on the 5/8 flange bearing. And when it gets through to the other side of the dashboard, I've got a universal joint taken, I think, from a Chevy Chevette, you know, wrecking yard parts from where I stand, that conveniently happen to have a 5/8 bore. Off the cross member here, we've got a pillow block bearing to support the shaft, and the shaft passes down through the floor of the chassis on another 5/8 flange bearing, and that's it's actually working very nicely and very smoothly. You can see the shiny spots on the U-joint where I clearanced the yoke with a Dremel to get it to operate on a better angle. And underneath, if I can just do a little camera adjust here, you can see the mock-up of the pitman arm, which will ultimately be connected to a drag link that'll go to the front end and tie in the steering. Up front here, I've put in the fuel tank from a snowblower. It's an old 8-horse, I'm trying to remember what the brand was, Gilson I think, snowblower that had a Briggs engine on it. And what I did here was simply attach what basically amounted to some flat bar, although it's not flat, it's got a slight curve to it, as tank support brackets, and then I've got these big heavy duty hose clamps strapping the tank in place. I drilled out the fuel cap and put in a brass pipe thread to hose fitting to serve as a vent with the vent tube. Maybe I'll get into some more detail on that cap later. That's about it really for the moment. Little adjustments and tunings, and I'm kind of playing around with the bodywork on the hood. I made a big cutout in order to clearance for the engine because the engine's way too wide. Let me just see if I can get this hood back in place for the moment. There we go. And the cutout was pretty big and ugly looking. I mean, a lot of guys have to cut out the hoods, but I was kind of trying to clean it up a little bit. So I was experimenting with taking this flared section, which actually came out horizontally originally, and maybe reusing some of it to make some interesting lines. This is only a mock-up. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep it. But that's basically where we're at for the moment.